The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver glow over the dense woods that surrounded the secluded campsite. A group of college kids, filled with the invincibility of youth and the thrill of adventure, had gathered for a weekend of camping and debauchery. Mark, a tall and charismatic figure with a perpetual smirk on his face, was the de facto leader of the group. His girlfriend, Sarah, stood beside him, her fiery red hair illuminated by the flickering campfire. She had a devil-may-care attitude that matched Mark's own adventurous spirit. Jake, the joker of the group, couldn't resist cracking jokes even in the midst of the wilderness. Emily, the quiet, bookish girl with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, had been dragged along by Lisa, her vivacious and free-spirited roommate. And then there was Alex, the thrill-seeker and outdoor enthusiast, who had planned this expedition in hopes of pushing the boundaries of their college experiences. They had arrived at the campsite earlier in the day, full of excitement, and pitched their tents near the edge of a tranquil lake. As night descended upon the forest, they gathered around a roaring campfire, their laughter echoing through the trees. Mark, with a beer in hand, raised it high and shouted, "To beer, best friends, and of course, sexy bit." "Don't you dare finish that sentence," said Sarah behind her scowl. Everyone laughed and said cheers. They were jubilant and full of anticipation for the night's events to unfold. Sarah leaned over and whispered into Mark's ear, "This place is amazing, babe. Thanks for bringing us here." Mark grinned and kissed her passionately, oblivious to the enigmatic shadows that stretched deeper into the woods. He felt like the king of the world, surrounded by his court and embraced by the wild beauty of the forest. The hours ticked by, and the campfire burned lower. Ghost stories began to circulate, and Jake, ever the entertainer, told a particularly chilling tale about a werewolf that haunted these very woods. He exaggerated the details, his voice quivering for effect, and the group couldn't help but shiver. Lisa giggled nervously, her eyes darting to the surrounding trees. "Come on, Jake, don't freak us out like that." Emily, ever the skeptic, chimed in, "There's no such thing as werewolves, guys. It's just a story." But despite their rationalizations, an unsettling feeling hung in the air. The wind rustled through the leaves, carrying with it strange, mournful howls that echoed through the forest. Mark dismissed the howls as the wind playing tricks on them and suggested they continue their revelry. Who cares about werewolves? Not when there's sexy by. "Mark, I thought I told you to quit it," Sarah said while slapping Mark on the shoulder. Mark laughed it off with a smirk etched across his face. But as the night grew darker, the unease didn't dissipate. The woods seemed to close in around them, and a sense of foreboding settled over the camp, like a whispering warning from the very heart of the forest. As the night grew darker, the group's raucous laughter and clinking beer bottles slowly faded into uneasy silence. The woods seemed to close in around them, and a sense of unease settled over the camp. The group had put away a case of beer already, and Emily now stood up to go use the bathroom. "I guess there's no bathrooms in the woods, huh?" she said, turning to the group. "What are you talking about?" said Jake. "The world is your bathroom out here, Em." "Very funny," responded Emily, who now turned to find a secluded place in the woods. She walked to the edge of the woods and then disappeared into the darkness, as if she had been swallowed by the black. The strange howling sounds continued, now closer, then farther away, causing the group to exchange nervous glances. Sarah, Mark's girlfriend, leaned into him, clutching his arm tightly. "Mark, what if there's something out there? Maybe we should have taken those howls more seriously," she whispered. Mark brushed it off with a dismissive grin. "Nonsense, babe. Probably just some wolves or coyotes. We're perfectly safe here." But just as he spoke, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. The group froze, their faces drained of color, and their hearts pounded in their chests. "What the hell was that?" Jake stammered. Panic ensued. They scrambled to their feet, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they desperately searched for the source of the scream. Emily's absence was immediately noticeable, and a sickening dread settled over them. "Emily! Emily, are you okay?" Jake shouted, his voice trembling. The woods answered only with eerie silence, broken by the distant hoot of an owl. Terror washed over the group. They exchanged fearful glances, realizing that something was terribly wrong. Sarah's eyes welled up with tears as she clung to Mark. "We have to find her," she sobbed. But the darkness seemed impenetrable now, and the woods felt like a labyrinth of shadows and hidden threats. Fear gnawed at them, and indecision paralyzed their every move. Alex, the thrill-seeker, stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. "I'll go look for her. I can't just leave her out here." He grabbed a flashlight and a hunting knife, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. With a final nod to the group, he disappeared into the inky blackness, his footsteps fading away. The remaining group members huddled together around the dying campfire, their faces etched with fear and uncertainty. The sounds of the forest surrounded them, rustling leaves and distant hoots, but there was something more sinister in the air. Time passed slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. They waited for what seemed like hours, their hearts pounding with dread. The night was still and oppressive. Then, in the distance, they heard it. The sound of a gruesome struggle, a mix of growls, snarls, and another blood-curdling scream that echoed through the trees. It was followed by an eerie silence, even more unsettling than the violence they had just heard. Sarah clung to Mark, tears streaming down her face. "Alex, he's gone too." Their hopes shattered. They faced a grim reality. They were not alone in the woods, and something malevolent was hunting them. Panic clawed at their throats, and they were torn between staying to find Emily and Alex or fleeing to safety. The decision weighed heavily on their shoulders, and they knew that whatever they chose, their lives would be forever changed by the horrors of this night. As the group remained divided over what to do next, the mysterious howling drew closer. Sarah, her voice trembling, broke the tense silence. "We have to do something. We can't just stand here. Emily and Alex might still be out there." Mark, trying to maintain his composure, nodded. "You're right. We can't leave them behind, but we need to be smart about this. We'll stick together." Jake, looking pale and wide-eyed, stammered, "But what if that thing out there gets us too?" Lisa, the free spirit of the group, chimed in with an air of defiance. "We can't let fear control us. Let's find Emily and Alex, and then we'll figure out how to get out of here." With their resolve fortified, they armed themselves with flashlights and sticks, makeshift weapons to ward off any potential threats. The group moved cautiously into the woods, their footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. The beam of Mark's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing twisted tree trunks and gnarled branches that seemed to reach out for them like skeletal fingers. The eerie howling, now more frequent, seemed to be closing in on them, creating an atmosphere of dread that was almost palpable. As they ventured deeper into the woods, Mark noticed something peculiar. "Hey guys, have you noticed these tracks on the ground?" He pointed his flashlight at a set of large, canine footprints that seemed to lead in the same direction they were heading. Lisa shook her head. "Wolves, maybe." Jake, always quick with a joke, tried to lighten the mood. "Well, at least we know we're not dealing with Bigfoot." But the uneasy tension in the air persisted. They followed the tracks, their pace quickening as they called out for their missing friends. However, their calls were met only with the echoes of their own voices. Minutes turned into hours, and hope began to wane. Their flashlights dimmed, casting feeble beams that barely pierced the darkness. The relentless howling still haunted the night, closer now, as if mocking their futile efforts. Exhausted and disheartened, they gathered in a small clearing, the last remnants of the campfire's warmth, now a distant memory. Sarah's eyes were swollen from crying, and Mark's face bore a mixture of frustration and fear. "I don't understand it," he muttered. "We should have found them by now." Lisa's voice trembled as she spoke. "We can't stay out here much longer. We need to make a decision. Keep searching or head back to the campsite." Just then, Mark's flashlight revealed a torn piece of Emily's clothing hanging from a thorny bush. It was splattered with fresh blood. Sarah began to sob uncontrollably, and terror washed over Mark's face. Before they even had time to discuss their options, a bone-chilling howl erupted from the shadows nearby. The group huddled together, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The source of the howl remained hidden, but the message was clear. They were being watched, and whatever was out there was drawing nearer. The dread that had been festering within them now exploded into a paralyzing terror. Mark made a snap decision. "We need to get back to the campsite now. Maybe the fire will keep whatever it is at bay." With a mixture of fear and urgency, they turned and retraced their steps, fleeing from the unknown presence in the woods. Their hearts pounded. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, and the relentless pursuit of the unseen menace pushed them to their limits. As they reached the campsite, a chilling realization dawned upon them. The campfire was dead, and their tents lay torn and shredded. All that remained was a scene of chaos and destruction, a grim testament to the horrors that had unfolded in their absence. The relentless hunter was closing in on them, and they were trapped in a nightmare from which there might be no escape. Lisa, her voice quaking, broke the silence. "This can't be real. Our tents, everything is destroyed." Jake, who had always been the joker, was now pallid and trembling. "We should have listened to Emily about those werewolf stories." The haunting howls still echoed through the forest, growing closer with each passing moment, as if the very night itself was closing in on them. The group was paralyzed by fear, unable to comprehend the relentless menace that surrounded them. Sarah clung to Mark, her voice a desperate plea. "What are we going to do, Mark? We can't stay here." Mark, struggling to maintain his composure, weighed their options. "We can't stay here, that's for sure, but we need to stick together. We'll head back in the direction we came from and try to find help." With their flashlights leading the way, they retraced their steps, leaving behind the ruins of their campsite. The once familiar woods had become a labyrinth of shadows and horrors, each rustling leaf and distant hoot an ominous threat. Tension hung heavy in the air, and their footsteps were punctuated by whispered fears and frantic glances over their shoulders. The relentless howling pursued them, a haunting reminder that they were being hunted, and the hunter was closing in. As they trudged through the darkness, Mark noticed that the footprints on the ground were large, and they seemed to converge upon the group's path. "This can't be a coincidence," Mark muttered. "We are being herded, guided by something or someone." Lisa shivered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think it's some kind of wolf?" Mark couldn't ignore the gnawing dread that had taken hold of him. "It's not just a wolf. Wolves don't destroy campsites and play mind games with their prey." The group quickened their pace, desperation driving them forward. They called out for Emily and Alex, their voices trembling in the oppressive silence, but there was no response, only the ceaseless howling that seemed to come from all directions. As the night wore on, fatigue began to weigh them down, both physically and mentally. Fear clawed at their minds, and a creeping paranoia took root within them. Every rustling leaf, every distant shadow seemed to conceal a lurking threat. It was then that the group's bonds of friendship began to fray. Mark and Sarah, once the inseparable couple, found themselves at odds over whether to continue the search or prioritize their own safety. Jake's nervous laughter had turned into hysterical outbursts, and Lisa's carefree spirit had been replaced by a jittery anxiety. The relentless pursuit had taken its toll, and the group was on the verge of unraveling. They were no longer the carefree college kids who had embarked on a camping trip filled with raucous laughter and adventure. They were now prisoners of a nightmarish forest, and their descent into madness had only just begun. As the group trudged through the darkness, their spirits broken and their bonds strained, they couldn't escape the creeping realization that they were trapped in a relentless nightmare. The woods had become an inescapable labyrinth of shadows and despair, and the ceaseless howling surrounded them like a haunting chorus of doom. Mark, once the confident leader, was now plagued by doubt and desperation. He tried to keep a facade of control for Sarah's sake, but the weight of their situation bore down on him like a vice. "We can't keep going like this," he muttered, his voice trembling. "We're exhausted, and whatever's out there is toying with us." Sarah clung to him, her eyes filled with tears. "Mark, we can't just give up on Emily and Alex." Jake, who had descended into near madness, muttered to himself and occasionally let out nervous giggles. His once jovial spirit had been shattered, replaced by a paranoid delirium. Lisa, too, showed signs of distress, her once free spirit now burdened by fear and doubt. "We need to find a way out of here, but I don't know how much longer I can take this." As they stumbled forward, their flashlights cutting weak beams through the oppressive darkness. Mark's flashlight revealed something ominous, a series of claw marks on the trees, gouges that were far too large to be the work of any natural animal. The tracks on the ground were everywhere, too, and they converged upon the group like a sinister web. Mark's voice quivered as he pointed out the claw marks. "Look at this. Whatever it is, it's been marking its territory." Sarah shuddered, and the dread in the air grew heavier. "We're not dealing with anything normal. It's like something out of a nightmare." The howling, always present, seemed to grow louder and more frenzied, as if the creature that pursued them was closing in for the kill. Fearful glances were exchanged, and the group quickened their pace, stumbling through the tangled underbrush, desperate for an escape. Exhaustion gnawed at them, and their minds teetered on the brink of insanity. They had been reduced to mere shadows of their former selves, hollowed out by terror and despair. And still, the relentless pursuit continued. Mark knew they couldn't go on like this. They couldn't find the path out of the woods, and whatever was out there was about to strike. He was sure of it. Their final stand was at hand, a brutal and heart-pounding showdown with the relentless predator that had hunted them through the nightmarish forest. It was a battle of survival, a clash of fear and courage, and in the darkness they would make their desperate stand against the terror that had pursued them relentlessly. As the moon hung low in the sky, the group crouched in the eerie silence of the clearing, their makeshift weapons clutched tightly in trembling hands. The relentless howling had ceased, replaced by an unsettling calm that hung in the air like a shroud of dread. Mark, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation, whispered to the others, "Stay alert, everyone. When it comes, we need to be ready." They waited in breathless anticipation, the moments stretching into an agonizing eternity. The minutes felt like hours, and the darkness seemed to close in around them, suffocating in its intensity. And then, as if conjured by their collective terror, it emerged from the shadows, a hulking, monstrous figure, its eyes gleaming with malevolence. It was the embodiment of their nightmares, a creature torn from the pages of folklore, a werewolf. The werewolf advanced slowly, its massive form silhouetted against the faint light of the moon. Its snout dripped with fresh blood, and its yellowed teeth glinted with hunger. It moved with an unnatural grace, a predator closing in on its prey. The group held their breath, their hearts hammering in their chests as the werewolf drew closer to them. It snarled, sensing the presence of humans, and its predatory instincts drove it forward. With a sudden, coordinated effort, the group sprang into action. They launched their makeshift weapons at the beast. The werewolf howled in pain as the projectiles struck home, but it was not enough to bring the creature down. As the werewolf lunged forward, Mark, Sarah, Jake, and Lisa fought desperately, their determination fueled by the desperation of their situation. The battle was brutal and chaotic, a savage struggle between humanity and the monstrous. But the werewolf's strength was otherworldly, its claws and teeth like razors. One by one, the group members were knocked to the ground, their weapons shattered, and their bodies battered. The werewolf's eyes burned with an unholy hunger as it closed in on its prey. It latched onto Jake's arm, sinking its teeth into his flesh. Jake let out a blood-curdling scream, the likes of which no one had ever heard before. Mark, seeing the opportunity for what it was, seized a broken branch and drove it into the creature's side. The werewolf howled in agony, its form shifting and contorting. As the moonlight bathed the clearing, the beast transformed back into its human form, a man, bloodied and mangled. The morning sun began to creep over the horizon, casting a soft, golden light upon the clearing. The group stared in shock at the fallen man, realizing that their relentless pursuer had once been human. The man's breath came in ragged gasps, and he clutched at his wounds. His eyes, now human once more, were filled with pain and confusion. It was then that they noticed a deep gash on his arm, oozing with blood. Mark, his voice filled with disbelief, asked, "Why were you hunting us? What happened to you?" The man, his voice weak and raspy, managed to utter a few words. "I was cursed, couldn't control it. I didn't want this." The group, their emotions a whirlwind of fear, sympathy, and confusion, realized the tragic truth. The man had been cursed to become a werewolf, and his uncontrollable transformation had led to the night of terror they had endured. As the sun rose higher in the sky, they knew they needed to get the man medical help. They called for help on their cell phones, and soon rescue personnel arrived to tend to their injuries. Emily and Alex were eventually found, deep inside the woods, torn apart, their carcasses like carved turkeys on Thanksgiving. The group's nightmare had come to an end, but the scars of that night would remain with them forever. The forest, once a place of adventure and laughter, had become a realm of unimaginable horrors. They had faced the darkness and emerged from it, forever changed by the experience. What they had encountered in the woods that night was impossible, yet it took the lives of their two friends. They would never be the same.